Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and TuneIn.com, where you can find us by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote the podcast a little. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I had a funny time on Saturday. I went into New York to record this week's show. This is one of those rapid turnaround ones. And then I got together with a past guest to take a walk and get lunch and talk. I can't tell you anything about the guest's identity due to the that long non-disclosure agreement, my life. But it was a pretty intense time. This guy had a change of life status, and he opened up about a lot of aspects of his life, old and new. You guys know I'm hesitant to call any of my guests my friends because of low self-esteem, low T, whatever reason it is. But this felt like a conversation between two friends, so I'm going to go with that. The thing was, in the evening, I shared some of the conversation with my wife, which I told this guy I was going to do. She's the only person I don't have any secrets from. And she said, "So you only met this guy once for a podcast, right?" I said, "Yeah." "And he told you all of this stuff about his life today?" "Yeah, he did." And that got me thinking, partly because of this week's show also, I'm starting to think that the empathy that I bring to bear during podcasts actually means something to my guests. I want to point out that is not a natural trait of mine. That is something I have developed over the years of doing this show. At the same time, I don't want to imply that it's a trick of, making it seem like I give a shit about the other person. But it is a skill, a life skill maybe. And I think it's tied into the primary thing I have learned over 250 plus episodes of this show, which is how to listen. That is what I've gained the most. So I've talked about this ad nauseum for many of you, about how doing this show has changed who I am. I think that's a big part of it. Learning to listen has given me more insight into other human beings. And to that extent, they are willing to talk more, both on and off mic. Speaking of listening, this week's guest is Willard Spiegelman. It's Willard's third time on the show, and we have both listened to each other a lot. As we talk about late in this episode, I do fear he's starting to realize just how shallow I am, empathy notwithstanding, so it's possible this is the last time he's going to be on, but we'll see. Willard has a new book out. It's called If You See Something, Say Something. A Writer Looks at Art. It's published by SMU, where Willard recently retired after teaching for 45 years. The book collects almost 50 essays that Willard wrote for the Wall Street Journal over 3 decades about museums and art collections. And it's a joy to read. It's really wonderful. Willard's got a really perceptive eye and this lovely fluid prose style. The book has 3 parts. The first part covers art museums in Texas, then the rest of the U.S., and then the rest of the world. And over the decades, he's taken a lot of trips to see some out-of-the-way places, not just the the obvious big museums to go to. So the book works sort of like a tour guide for just wonderful art and architecture. It's a joy to read. It's different than Willard's other 2 essay collections, which we talked about in his previous 2 appearances on the show, because they're these discrete individual pieces. Now, because it was published by SMU's DeGolyer Library Press, If You See Something, Say Something is not available through Amazon or a lot of bookstores. I will have a link to it in the show notes if you're interested in checking it out. Trust me, it's beautiful prose, lovely photography, and really fantastic subject matter. Here's Willard's bio. Willard Spiegelman recently retired from his role as the Hughes Professor of English at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where since 1971 he taught generations of students how to read, to write, and to think. From 1984 until 2016, he was also the editor-in-chief of Southwest Review. He has written many books and essays about English and American poetry. For more than 30 years, he has been a regular contributor to the leisure and arts pages of the Wall Street Journal. And now, the 2018 Virtual Memories conversation with Willard Spiegelman. What was the process like for you in terms of just looking back at past columns and figuring out what to keep and what not to?
That was easy, and it was determined because I've written for the Wall Street Journal for 30 years. And I began, I think I say this in the introduction, I began by doing book reviews. And then I asked my editor whether I could branch out and do some other things. And he said, sure. So he was very generous. I don't know how much you know about the history of the Wall Street Journal over the past 30 years, but for a paper, and I'm not talking about its politics or anything like that, but for a paper that has been well established and well heeled, whether this is because of Mr. Murdoch and his minions or other things in the industry, I don't know, it has gotten thinner and poorer. That is, the Dow Jones has financial problems. And over the course of the past 30 years, the arts sections of the paper have become smaller. There used to be more articles every week. There used to be longer articles. They used to be on more serious subjects. Now they are fewer in number and shorter in length. And less, we can call it high culture stuff is being done, more pop culture stuff is being done. That's the way it is everywhere, I suppose. In any event, I began writing 30 years ago, and I have not kept a good record. I'm not a very good record keeper. I must have done hundreds and hundreds of pieces. In 30 years, if I've done 10 or 12 pieces a year, that's hundreds. And I was asked to do a collection or I volunteered. I asked the sweet publisher who wanted to do this, what kind of book would be good. And he said the art pieces. The first thing I realized is that any review that's of an exhibition has lost its shelf life because that exhibition doesn't exist anymore. Right. So I limited myself only to things that were still out there, visible, places, buildings, specific works of art in the masterpiece column, or other reviews of museums that still had some kind of traction. So that was relatively easy to do and fun to do. One of the things I regret that have happened is that I was doing a nice series of small out-of-the-way museums in the country that people don't know about. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Shreveport, Louisiana, New Britain, Connecticut, Hyde Falls, New York, Old Lyme, Connecticut. There are wonderful small museums here, and that was really doing a public service. Those have, I think, been completely eliminated because the journal will do only reports about things that are newsworthy or are reviews of specific things.
Sure.
So those are gone. So the pieces, this is a long answer to the question, the pieces chose themselves.
Mm-hmm. And revisiting them, did you go back in terms of just, rereading your old pieces?
Well, these are verbatim what they are. Yes.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if you had the, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote X, or if you felt pretty good in the process of looking back.
No, but you're asking a more general question that any writer can answer.
What holds up? Yeah.
When you review old things of yours, I think everybody has a kind of double or ambiguous response. On the one hand, you say, gosh, I was so smart. Yeah. How did I know that? What a beautiful sentence. On the other hand, you say, oh gosh, what a piece of crap. How could I be so banal? How could I be so jejune? How could I be so ignorant? So the combination of legitimate pride and legitimate embarrassment is a standard one.
Which one weighs best?
In a book like this, I was just so pleased to have pictures in the book that I thought this is a new genre for me, the coffee table book. There I am. And if people don't like the prose, they have these beautiful works of art or pictures to look at.
Or it could be like a Sebald thing where they might not actually be what they're supposed to be. Yeah. But anyway, that's getting a little too meta, I suppose. Now, the book came out from SMU Press, where you once taught for many decades. Did you consider it a farewell gift to Dallas, or Dallas's farewell gift to you?
It was both. That's exactly right. The man who was the librarian at one of the special collections at SMU is a former student of mine. He's now, he's a boy who's now in his 50s. And he came to me and he said, we really should do something like this. And I said, that's a great idea, because it would give me such pleasure to have it done. And it really is a kind of farewell gift from the university to me, and a farewell gift from me to the city.
Given that a number of them are revolving around Dallas area.
Dallas museums. And Texas more generally. One whole section is about Dallas. The unfortunate thing is that because the book is privately printed in a limited edition, it could not be sold via Amazon or other websites because the commission would be too great. So it's available only through the publisher or in various art museums in Texas, or at the Barnes & Noble in Dallas, or if somebody wants it and finds it online, he or she can write to the to Gollier Library and get it. I have no idea what the sales have been.
Yeah, that was my thing when I first saw it. I'm like, let me just find the Amazon link for no.
There is no Amazon link.
We'll put an appropriate one in the show notes for this.
Thank you.
Let me ask. It's jumping around a little from what I thought we'd talk about, but you retired several years ago. Or you've retired in the last year plus.
Well, let's put it this way. I received my last paycheck in June 2017, but I taught my last class in spring of 2016.
Yeah, we had spoken that summer, and I think you had said you had graded your last paper.
That's right.
That's right.
So I have been, this is the spring semester of 2018. I last taught 2 years ago. It's hard to remember what it was like, but I wake up every morning and say, I don't have to prepare a class, or even better, I don't have to grade any papers, and even better, I don't have to go to any committee meetings, and even better, I don't have to deal with the increasing bureaucracy and businessification of university life, and those things are one of the main things that made me decide to bail out now, because even private universities and colleges, but especially public ones, are so under the thumb of rules and conventions and pieces of paper and protocols that have to be followed that didn't used to have to be followed. I can resent this, I can regret it. It's not my problem anymore. And the younger people who are coming into the profession learn that this is the way life is, just as young doctors are coming into a profession that is not the profession that my late father, who was a physician, went into in 1945 when he got out of the Army. And he hung up his shingle and had a practice. Yeah. Those days and those people don't exist anymore. And the life of being a college teacher doesn't exist anymore. But I will tell you something about books. I don't know whether you know the 3 novels of John Williams. Does that name ring a bell?
Stoner. I had the other 2, Butchers.
That's right. One is a Western, and one is
Ancient Rome.
Is Augustus, about Augustus. That was the one that won the National Book Award, I think. I read Stoner last summer. It had been recommended by several people. Let me tell you, Gil, Stoner is not a book to give to or recommend to a man who has just retired from being an English teacher for 45 years. I was on the train. I remember this so well. It's beautifully written. But I was on the train from New York to Connecticut, and I was reading the last 30 or 40 pages, and I was in tears. And I was so happy that there were very few people on the same car with me because I was visibly and audibly making a fool of myself. I was trembling and wailing.
My brother described it as Jude the Obscure with tenure. I mean, we both love the book. He's a teacher.
It was so sad. It had such a ring of truth to it.
Yeah, it's a few guests in recent months have mentioned their first time. It's amazing how that book, despite being out for 50 years, keeps being discovered.
That's right. It came out in the mid-'60s.
Yeah. And
65, 66.
People just keep discovering it.
That's right.
And discovering that, oh my God, my life was presaged by...
Well, you know...
Or I didn't go down that route.
This is part of the brilliance of the re-releases from New York Review of Books. They seem to pick great things. And they're so beautifully packaged and produced and elegantly designed.
But the thing I wanted to ask, beyond the notion of retirement, is a sense of legacy. And neither of us have kids. We don't have that sense of extending through time. Do you see that much like your student grows up and becomes an SMU Press person who wants to do a book? Do you see a sort of legacy in terms of what you've done over the course of your career?
2 years ago, in September of 2015, I agreed to have a thing done in my honor at SMU, and I agreed to it only as a fundraising effort for the Southwest Review. And one of the things I realized in my last year at the university and in Dallas, and having several things at which I was the poster boy, or at whose center I was the honoree, I realized I hate being the center of attention. And people said to me, but you're a teacher. I said, that's different. That's a private performance. It's me and my students. But to be honored by people who are saying blush-making things, I would rather just have the ground open up. But I did this event, and there were hundreds of people there, and it included... This is another long roundabout answer to your question.
That's what this conversation's about.
It included students from my very first years. Now, unlike you, I have these students who are really child surrogates. And I think any teacher, with or without his or her own children, any good teacher will say that. My earliest students are now grandparents. I'm in touch with them. And there were people at this event from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the aughts, and the teens. So, going back 45 years. And I saw them. I said, here's this one, here's that one. I introduced them. And I have a capacity to remember, many of my students. One of the things that gave me such kind of nostalgic pleasure at the end, as I was dismantling my office and putting things in the Willard Spiegelman archive at this same library, my students said, we want your papers. I said, this is a very nice thing to say. It's very gratifying. He said, your biographer will want all of this. I said, good. And I said, this is great reassurance, and keep them all there, safe and sound. And the moment I die, you can burn them all because I won't care. But until that time, I'm very happy to know that all of my papers, my notes, everything I've done, everything is there. The last thing I parted with was my 45 years worth of roll books, grade books, which over the course of the past decades, in an idle moment, I would open. And I did it one last time for about an hour. I simply went through 1971 to 2016, and I would go down the lists. And increasingly, the names are meaningless, but on every page, in every class, there would be somebody whom I remembered, a face I remembered, a comment I remembered, an interaction I remembered, and it brought great pleasure. Others just faded into the background. One of the things, of course, that any teacher has happen, this is true of not just teachers, everybody, somebody from the past comes and says to you,
"You changed my life.
You changed my life," and or more specifically, "I remember when you said," and then quote something, which either you have no recollection of having said, or is exactly the opposite of what you probably said, but it doesn't matter.
It made sense to them.
It made sense to them. It changed their life. Good. That's fine. Anyway, it was very gratifying at this event, and I said to the people there, the thing in my life that has given me the greatest pleasure is having been their teacher. Mm-hmm. And the second thing, again, this is a plug for the Southwest Review, I said, you're all here because there's a fundraising effort. It's not an effort to say goodbye to me, but it's a fundraising effort to help the Southwest Review stay alive in the 21st century. So that was very nice.
Yeah, besides the shift to electronic that everything has gone through, how did the process of making a literary magazine change over your tenure?
This is one of the reasons I'm glad I stopped. I was not interested in or capable of, nor did we have the resources to effect a real change to electronic media. Mm-hmm. And this involves money. My successor, who took over a year ago, is in the process both of redesigning the magazine. There has not been a print issue since fall of 2017. It's under redesign and renovation, and apparently it's taking longer to do. But he's also having to build from scratch a legitimate website that will either feature things from the magazine or the print magazine, or else supplement and complement those things. And this is what many journals, Kenyon Review, other places with deeper pockets, have been able to do successfully. And they have my encouragement, and I'm glad I don't have anything to do with it, because it's not my talent to do such a thing.
Yeah, that's what I'd wondered.
And of course, print subscriptions have all started to diminish. Mm-hmm. Circulation is down everywhere.
In terms of submissions?
Submissions, I don't know.
From your time, I mean, were they...
Oh, they just kept going up and up.
Yeah.
Submissions always went up.
Everyone's a writer?
Everyone's a writer, and this is the bane of the MFA programs. I mean, everybody is a writer, and everybody is sending off stuff every day, and increasingly we are being drowned in the banality of most of the submissions. A friend of mine, a man in his 60s, said to me a couple of years ago, I'm thinking of writing a memoir, but I'm too old to write a memoir. Because what they're learning in their, my least favorite phrase, creative nonfiction workshops is to tell their stories. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in the life story of a 23-year-old.
Yeah. Unless something incredibly fucked up and traumatic has happened, there's really nothing to
No.
even
Something traumatic can happen.
But still, to be able to process that and have a real life story.
To have a prose style.
Yeah. You talk about that.
I mean, they can go on Oprah, they can go on television and tell their story. That the story will be told. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in reading things.
Yeah. Well, let me ask about the book. Did you ever want to be a painter?
Oh, no.
I know you're incredibly verbal. The book is so much about looking at art.
No, not at all. No. One of the things, I think I've mentioned this to you before, I've certainly written about this. I think that everybody is born with a predisposition to the eye or the ear. And for me, it was always the ear. Yeah. That is, when I was growing up, music was my passion. I wanted to be a singer. Or if I could perform, I would be on stage singing and dancing. Painting, no. The art world, no. Visualization, no. To me, it came through the ear and the mouth. That is, the ear you hear with, the mouth you speak with. Mm-hmm. So it was about language and sound. Language as a way of making order of something with words, sound being something you take in and listen to, and perhaps you then sing or you appreciate music. And when I was a kid, I played the piano and I went to concerts all the time. That was, to me, the great art. Mm. And seeing, I was not a born looker, but I had to become one. And it happened. and I was very pleased with. You ask about what do I think about what I read. I was very pleased with the introduction I wrote to the book because it gave in detail both a summary of how I became an art writer and even more how I became a looker at and appreciator of the visual arts. And also, it's a kind of summa of, or a little condensation of, the kinds of things that I have to use the past tense, my students to do when looking at a work of literature. What are the questions you ask? And they're the same regardless of the medium, whether it's a piece of music, a work of art, or a work of literature. And you ask yourself the questions, what do I see here? What do I notice? What do I not understand? And then, why is this the way it is and not some other way? What other path could the person have gone down? What other word, what other note, what other color, what other design could the painter, the artist, the singer, the composer have used here? That's all you do. And then you, as a writer, you do the three things that determine a response. One, you describe what you have seen or read or heard. Two, you analyze what you have seen or read or heard. Why is it this way? Why is it that way? And three, you evaluate. Was it worth doing? Is it any good? How do you know? And these are the kinds of things that anybody who's a critic, Tony Scott from the New York Times wrote a book called, what was it called?
Better Living Through Criticism.
Yes, everyone's a critic. Better Living Through Criticism. And it's a very sort of middle-brow kind of book with lots of nuggets of brilliance in it. But he asks the same question. Everybody's a critic. You go to a movie with friends and you come out and you say, did you like it? Why did you like it? Well, that's an act of criticism. I don't like, this is idiosyncratic, but I'm certainly not unique in this. I don't like going to museums with other people. By other people, I mean two things. Ideally, I would like to be in a museum or a room with nobody around me. But more than that, I don't want to go with a friend to a museum and have to trail somebody or be engaged in conversation at the same time or change my pace to suit my companion's pace. I want to be there on my own. And if I do go to a museum, especially a big museum, with a friend to see a show, the deal always is, okay, it's 11 o'clock, I'll meet you at 12.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, Amy and I did that with the Hockney exhibition a few weeks ago. It was, let's just go our own bit. We know where the end of the line is. We'll meet up there, but let's just see things at the pace we want to see things.
And then if you want, you come back for a second helping.
Yeah.
I saw the Hockney show in one of those great bitter December days.
Oh, yeah, when we had the
And I said, I want California warmth. And I walked over to the Met, and Hockney was just the ticket. It was not a snowy or wet day. There was sunshine in the air here in Manhattan, but I said, I don't want just sunshine. I want swimming pools.
Did you want the 60s swimming pool Hockney or the 90s more broken down from the porch?
The 90s stuff was too garish to me.
I wonder, because I didn't think I would dig those, but they actually moved me in a weird way.
I like the 60s stuff. And even more to me, more interesting to me, was the very early stuff from England when he was still a student, before he came
the more abstract,
to Los Angeles. More abstract,
yeah.
looked like Philip Guston.
Yeah.
And sort of gay pride, political consciousness in some of those early semi-obscene works. It was like Keith Haring, too.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. I really liked the, what do you call them? The Instagram. Is that what it is? Not Instagram.
The app, the iPad ones?
The iPad ones, which were changing as you saw them on the wall. I thought those were wonderful. He's constantly inventive. He's constantly playful. He's a happy artist. And we think of so many painters, artists in general, regardless of medium, as being filled with angst or Sturm und Drang and unhappiness and filled with demons, Francis Bacon, people like that. David Hockney is a happy man. Does that mean he is not serious? Does that mean he's not a genius? Is he superficial? Is he merely decorative? I don't think so, but the same charge can be made about Matisse, who was my favorite painter of the 20th century, who said famously he wanted to paint a picture that a man could come home to from his office and sink into like an armchair. totally for comfort. Now, that's a little sort of faux naif on Matisse's part, but it's a legitimate aim to give pleasure. And I say, no, I don't say it in this book. I said it in something else I wrote in my last book, that I remember being very scornful when I was a teenager. One is always scornful of and embarrassed by one's parents. When my parents decided it was time, and they had a little bit of extra money to buy an oil painting, they went to downtown Philadelphia, where a friend of theirs had a gallery, and they bought an oil painting. Now, what was the oil painting? Well, it was by someone no one's ever heard of, a Sunday painter. And it was, I remember this painting so well, it was a kind of seascape, greens and blues, and maybe there was a seagull in it, clouds and waves, perfectly banal. And my mother said to the dealer, "Oh, it's beautiful, and the colors will match my sofa." And the art dealer said, "You never buy a work of art because it matches a piece of furniture." You know, my mother was right. She was absolutely right. If it gives you pleasure and you think of your living room as a Gesamtkunstwerk, if you think of it as something which is an assemblage of things, why the hell not? Why shouldn't the color of the picture pick up the green in the sofa and give you a kind of jolt, or something more gentle than a jolt when you walk in and see it? Good for my mother.
A sense of harmony.
That's right. And that picture is now in my brother's basement somewhere. I don't like it. I didn't want it. But, you know, she was right. She was answering a kind of primal instinct for something beautiful. And, you know, in the art world now, you use words like beautiful or decorative or pretty. You're scorned. You're sent from the room. Those are not values that we cherish.
And how much was that your goal, I suppose, with the columns and the reviews? Trying to restore that, I think.
I don't think that was it primarily, but when you're given 1,000 words or 800 words, you have several aspects of an assignment to fulfill. You want to say something. If it's about a single painting, you want to say something about how it came to be. You have to give increasingly now some background or biographical information, because the readership, even the educated readership of the Wall Street Journal, often doesn't know much about stuff. So you have to give some background.
They know about apps. They know about hedge funds.
But they don't know about Caravaggio, so we have to tell them that. And then you do the analysis. This is what is going on in this picture. This is what it looks like. The other thing, of course, is that, say, from an app, nothing substitutes for an upfront, close look, face-to-face, with a painting. You do not see it online in the best reproduction. You do not see the texture of the brush strokes. The color is always going to be different, and you do not see how the light is hitting it in a room. I mean, if you're I've written about paintings in old-fashioned museums in Europe, in which lighting is only natural. So at one time of day, the sun is hitting a picture directly, and you can't see it. Another time of day, there's no sun coming in, so you can't see it in a different way. And that's even more true of paintings in churches, especially if they haven't been restored, or especially if you have to keep feeding, in Italy, little euros into the box to illuminate a picture for 90 seconds or so. It's not ideal. But that's part of the experience of seeing it. So, you know, you try to give a sense not only of the thing in itself, but the experience of looking at the thing or being with the thing.
Is there a place you'd most like to revisit that you've written about?
A place?
A museum, or like Marfa, you know, an outdoor thing.
Oh, well, Marfa, Texas. I wrote a review for the Wall Street Journal earlier this year of a book about Marfa. And the book is both it's historical, economic, artistic. It's about real estate. It's about the phenomenon of this West Texas town. And what really impressed me, and again, this says something about the readership of the Wall Street Journal, is that 8 or 10 readers wrote in, all of whom didn't condemn me, didn't condemn the writer of the book, condemned the whole idea of Marfa and Donald Judd and minimalist art, a term which he didn't like, and his boxes and his concrete, and it's all the emperor's new clothes, and it's all bullshit, and it's all this is what the hoity-toity elite thinks is art. The people were so ignorant and so unforgiving that it was really kind of crude, but
refreshing to see them have a visceral reaction.
Well, yes, I suppose so. But one of the things, a lesson I have not learned is never read readers' comments.
Oh yeah, that's the internet all around, dude. You've really got to get over that.
The other thing is, I mean, I read them, but when you have a big piece, a news thing, a political thing, an economic thing, and you see that 1,700 people have written in, the question is, to whom are they writing? Because somebody who's on the thread is not going to go back to the very first comment and then post his 1,700 times later. People will log in and see a couple of things and maybe post a comment and then go on. But nobody is responding to anything. They're mouthing off. But what interested me, and this is an answer to your question, I dream of Marfa, Texas. I love Marfa. I love my recollection of the light, the way the light strikes the milled aluminum boxes there, everything there. Yes, it is in danger of becoming like Santa Fe, but it won't become Santa Fe because it's too much out of the way and there's no airport.
It's just too inaccessible to get to.
It's too inaccessible. It's 3 hours from an airport, and you have to make a pilgrimage to it. And there's no other base of economic operation in the city. But Marfa is someplace I would go back to in a minute. The great museums of the world, the great encyclopedic museums of the world, are the Louvre, the Prado, the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna, which I've not been to, the National Gallery in London, the Metropolitan Museum, and I would go to any of those museums, the Uffizi, I would go to any of those museums any time. Then the issue becomes, what is it like being in a museum? Mm-hmm. And that's where you really have to be committed to the act of looking. Because going to a large museum, which is overrun with tourists, can be often, at best, a dispiriting experience, or at the very least, an unpleasant experience. I've been to the Sistine Chapel twice, 3 times, and each time I would not recommend it to people who don't have the kind of determination to see it. Each time you have to endure, unless you're on a special tour, you have to endure the wait to get in. Sometimes you can get in, I suppose, if you pay extra money, you can get in at special times, fine. But otherwise you're outside for an hour more, and then you get in. Then you get in, and you have to say to yourself, here I am in this room. There are hundreds of people around me. They are talking. They are bumping into me. They are stepping on my feet, and I can't really see everything. What do you do? And then the answer is very simple. I figured this out for myself. I'm sure many other people do too. I went to the Sistine Chapel. There are benches on 3 of the sides, maybe 4 of the sides. I would wait for a seat to become vacant, and I would take it. And I would sit there and look. And I would get a mirror so I could look up and around, and I would just look by myself. And when I was finished there, I would get up and wait for a seat to become available on the other side, and do that again. And then the other side, and do it again. And if you don't like people stepping on your toes, and you can't ignore it, and you don't want people in your way, don't go.
There was at least 10 people online at the coffee place on 79th Street in the walk here, and I just turned around and left. I'm that sort of guy.
And I think the Sistine Chapel is very much like a coffee shop on 79th Street. Yeah. But it does become an issue of what you will wait for and what you won't. Mm-hmm. I mean, I won't wait in line for a restaurant. Shake Shack, I've never been to one.
They don't have lines. They've expanded so much, there aren't lines. There's one in Union Station in Washington that I've gone to, but only because
there's one on the Upper West Side. There's one in Union Square. I've never been to one. I'm not going to stand in line for a hamburger.
Right. Let me ask, beyond pilgrimages for hamburgers, when did you become a secular pilgrim in terms of, going out and seeking these places that had meaning?
a secular pilgrim. I suppose when I was 22 years old, I went to Europe for the first time, and I was on a 10-week charter flight. It was the Harvard Student Agency. And I remember flying from JFK, sorry, different president. I flew from JFK to Paris, where one of my college roommates had been for the year, and he picked me up, and then I flew back 10 weeks later from Amsterdam. And in that 10 weeks, I was in France, Belgium, England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and then Amsterdam, Holland. And in those 10 weeks, I became a tourist in ways that I'd never been before. And what this did to me, in addition to opening my eyes to things I had read about or things I had seen in reproduction or historic sites or sites with literary echoes for me, what it did for me was to make me realize that you can be a tourist in your own country. You can be a tourist by walking outside. Mm-hmm. There's always something to see, there's something to learn, there's something to study, there's something to listen to. So it opened my eyes and ears and made me more alert as a person. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go places. I have said to people, this is absolutely true, there's no place in the world I would not go to if somebody offered me an invitation, especially if it's a friend. Somebody says, come to Toledo or Sheboygan or name any city, Boise. If somebody is going to invite me to go to a place, especially if I'm not paying for it, any place is interesting for a weekend. Mm-hmm. If I'm paying for it myself, I will choose more carefully because there's some places I don't want to go to because they're too far away or they're too expensive or they're too dangerous or they're not to my liking. But I will go to any museum that seems to have something to offer. So if I do go to a new city, the first thing I look for is the art museum.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I wonder, though. You mentioned being a tourist, and in a recent piece you wrote in the Wall Street Journal, you do differentiate pilgrim and tourist. And have you had those pilgrimage-type experiences, or do you consider yourself largely a tourist in terms of how you approach these places?
When I went to Marfa, I was making a pilgrimage, but each time I went, I was on an assignment of some sort. Yeah.
Do you differentiate those two concepts?
Yes and no, and any trip can be a combination, of course. I went to Greece for the first time in my life the summer of 2016. And I went to Greece because I did not want to die without having seen the Parthenon. The great Edith Hamilton didn't go to Greece until she was 90 years old. They made her an honorary citizen of Athens. Yeah. But this was so many years ago that Athens was a different city from what it was in 2016. And one of the things I realized many things. One, I don't want to travel in the summer when it's hot anywhere. Two, Athens in June is 100 degrees. And Delphi, where I also went, was 100 degrees. Now you can say, but it's dry heat. Fine. It's still 100 degrees. Another thing I learned, and I had always suspected this, is that basically I don't like ruins. I would not have been a very good archaeologist. And scrambling up the Parthenon, up the Acropolis, to walk around the Parthenon, you can't get into it, has a certain kind of charm, but it was not a magical thing for me. I much preferred the gorgeous, air-conditioned, modern New Acropolis Museum across the way, which is brilliantly set up, where you see the whole frieze, including places for where the Elgin marbles might be, if the British Museum ever released them. I like museums. They're comforting. And I realized that I did one trip when I was in Athens simply to sit in an air-conditioned bus. It was a trip that took the bus out to Cape Sunion to see the temple of Neptune there. It was totally banal. The person who was giving the tour knew nothing more than what I knew. It was a bus full of tourists who were basically ignorant of everything. And we got there and we walked around another ruin and we saw the Aegean Sea. And it was fine. We got back on the bus and came home. I did this to spend a day in an air-conditioned bus. Now, that's tourism at its worst. But
we didn't get there and ask for a cheeseburger.
There was no, there must have been a gift shop or something.
I'm just saying, if you really want to push the American tourist.
Delphi, on the other hand, was really wonderful. I mean, being in the Delphi Museum, which is a truly extraordinary museum, and I did write a piece about the great charioteer of Delphi, which is a 14-room museum which gives you in miniature all of Greek art, and the last room is the great charioteer of Delphi. And that was a piece that didn't make it into this book because it was published afterwards. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see everything, just as I would like to know everything. That is, it's a matter of curiosity. Obviously, some things are easier to understand, and if you have a mind that is more capable of understanding some kinds of things, perhaps you are more resistant to other kinds of things. But ideally, one wants to be informed about everything. So that's a. But look, Aristotle said man is an animal who wants to learn.
I'm down. That's why I do this.
So one learns.
Yeah. You mentioned in our last conversation the Dr. Johnson's enjoying life versus enduring life concept. You're still in enjoying mode, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Oh, sure. Sure. I'm in enjoying mode because I happen to be, I'm knocking on wood here, I happen to be in possession of good health.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, a high school classmate, said to me last year, she said, remember when we were young and old people seemed to be so cranky and ill-tempered? I said, yes. She said, the reason was they were in pain.
Yeah, everything hurts.
They didn't have they didn't have hip replacement or shoulder replacement or knee replacement. They were always in pain. So I've been lucky in not having had chronic pain yet.
And are you in the Philip Roth everyman mode where old friends drop off at this point, or are you still young enough or just lucky enough that friends are sticking around?
Well, I'm 73, so of course people have gone off, and everyone has a list. A laundry list is the wrong word. You check off. This one is no longer here. This one is no longer here. Of two things. One image that I use, sometimes something will come to me, and I'll say, oh, this is something I'll have to tell so-and-so or ask so-and-so about. And then I realize he's not available anymore. Yeah. And it's availability. Mm-hmm. Certain people are not available, not only for pleasure, but also for use. Yeah. The other thing is we sometimes talk, my partner and I, or other contemporaries and I, wonderingly, who's the next? Who will be the next to go? And I say, it could be you tomorrow morning. You know, we all have friends who are ill, who have chronic diseases, but the next person who goes might be somebody who was hit by a bus.
Or risks his life in a snowstorm trying to do a podcast, as we did back in 2012.
Well, I wouldn't make it that...
to be that specific. But
I don't think any life was being risked.
Sure.
It was inconvenience.
Right.
It was just inconvenience.
Do you wish you retired earlier?
No.
Okay.
No. It's an interesting question. What regrets does one have in life? I have very few regrets.
I just wonder if the life since retirement makes you think, wow, if I'd had this a few extra years of this, it'd be okay.
No, I liked the income.
Certainly.
Income is good. I did have the feeling, I bet all teachers say this, it's both a specific and a general thing. I think everybody can say at a certain point, everybody wakes up, no matter what the profession, everybody wakes up one morning and says, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Now, this presumes you have sufficient economic
even
bolstering.
If you're insecure economically, you can wake up not wanting to do.
But now I don't have to do this anymore. Yeah. I don't have to do this anymore. With a teacher, it was becoming clear to me that I was on automatic pilot. My students did not know this because I was very good at performing. And if it had ever become known to me or inferable by me that they knew that I was on automatic pilot, then it would certainly be the sign that it was time to go. But I said, I'm on automatic pilot, and I can hear myself speaking, some disembodied voice is coming. Oh, it's coming from within me. And the other thing was, well, two other things. One, I mentioned the increasing bureaucratization of the university, which I couldn't abide, the committee work, the paperwork, the triviality of all of this. And second of all, I am not alone. I am not unique, but I am uncommon in that for all of those decades, I used to make my students write every day. Helen Wendler at Harvard said, "Oh, you're a saint." I said, "No, I am both a sadist and a masochist." And I mentioned this to a student of mine some years ago. I said, "I just can't bear reading student prose anymore. I just can't bear it." You would think that in some ways it would become easier. You do it unconsciously. It became harder and harder to do it because I would read the prose and I would be stuck. And I would get up and walk away and then come back to it. Mm-hmm. Rather than sitting down and doing it with efficiency, I did it with maximum inefficiency. And I just couldn't do that anymore. My brilliant student said, "So nobody's making you ask the students to write. Why don't you just stop?" I paused. I said, "What a brilliant fellow you are." And then I said, I can't do it any other way. I mean, that's the way I teach. Everyone complains that students don't write well. I mean, colleagues in other departments, my students don't write well. And I ask them, "What are you doing to help your students write?" They seem to think this is our province. We are school marms and schoolmasters who are there with our rulers beating the kids on the wrists. I didn't go into this line of work to become a seventh grade teacher, but much of my work and much of the work of any good professor of literature is exactly that. And I was very good at it, and I came to be tired of it. So I stopped.
When we last spoke, you also talked about that notion of breaking habits, whether they're good or bad, that was something to look forward to, I suppose.
Yes, thank you for remembering that.
I listened to it last night to sit down and make sure I don't ask the same things again and again. But
life is a series of deepening and improving habits, and simultaneously, concurrently, or alternatively breaking habits. And those can be intellectual habits or bodily habits, things that you used to do that you don't want to do or can't do any longer, choices that you used to make that you would rather not make, going in different directions. I think that's a version of what I meant when I said curiosity is the greatest gift. Mm-hmm. Or never being bored. You know, the great John Berryman poem about being bored. Being bored means you have no inner resources. I'm never bored. Well, sometimes I'm bored if I'm at a very boring dinner party and the people next to me are really boring and I've done my best to enliven things. But I'm never bored when I'm by myself. I think that's the interesting thing.
Yeah, see, I possess the old Yiddish curse of being boring to interesting people, but interesting to boring people. And that's really been tough for me over the course of my life. But, I made up the Yiddish curse, but I think it's a good one to...
Well, if seen rightly, every person can be interesting, by which I mean, if you are a great novelist, or if you are a person with a great imagination, or you are a person who is a good therapist, you can bring out something in somebody else. But man, there are a lot of people who, when they present themselves, are really boring, and you don't know where to go with it or what to do with it. And I'm pretty good socially at least feigning interest in other people. But after a while,
don't tell anyone, but so am I. It's okay.
After a while, one wishes to be at home. You know, it's the old very standard thing of going to a fundraiser, $100 a plate dinner for your favorite charity. There are many people, P.S., mostly men, because fundraisers are usually the province and parties are usually the province of women. Many men will say, "I'll pay $200 if I can stay home."
Right.
I don't want to go to the party. I don't want to go to the dinner. I don't want to go to the dance.
Which could be a fundraising model when you get down to it.
Well, look, I mean, if it costs $100,000 to throw a party and you're going to net $10,000, why don't you just throw out a call and make the $50,000 without having the party?
We've got a new model. I think we're going to change the world, you and me, in terms of fundraising. How'd you meet your partner?
I'm sorry?
How did you meet your partner? We've never talked about him.
Oh, well, we met in that hotbed of romance, the senior common room. Do you know what a senior common room is? The senior common room of Lowell House at Harvard University in May 1968, almost 50 years ago. Harvard houses and Yale colleges are based on the model of Oxford and Cambridge houses and colleges. So Lowell House at Harvard is one of the undergraduate houses, and it has, I'm sure this is still the case, it has, they used to be called masters, we don't use that anymore, heads or deans or some other word is used instead of master, and then a staff of faculty members who range from the lowest of the low, graduate students who are teaching fellows, that's what I was, that's what we were, and then up the academic ranks to other full professors. And these people have some sort of social or intellectual base in that particular college and are supposed to be available to the undergraduates for social and academic and intellectual needs. In May of 1968, I was coming into Lowell House at Harvard to be a tutor, teaching fellow, starting in the fall of 1968. And Ken, my partner, had already been there for 2 years. And so I met him that May when the master of the house, a classicist named Zeph Stewart, who was the younger brother of a man named Potter Stewart of the Supreme Court. These are people from the old Republican aristocracy of Ohio. He was the master, and he came in. He said, "Bill," as I was called, "do you know Ken Bleeth?" And I thought, no, but I'd like to. And that's how we met. So that was 50 years ago.
And stuck together pretty well for 50 years?
Apparently we have. We're contemplating marriage, but we don't want to rush into anything. It's an interesting question, and I don't normally use words like heteronormativity. To me...
You were in academia for 45, 50
but
years.
I never used words like that. I use words like comma splice. Or, dactylic hexameter. To me, marriage would be useful as a practical mechanism.
With most, in terms of financial and hospital rights.
If there still were civil unions and, domestic partner benefits, I would opt for that. But those don't exist anymore now that we have the Marriage Act. So I would do it if it becomes evident, as I think it probably will be, that it's to our practical and financial advantage to be married. On the other hand, various young people say, and I understand their point of view, that it is our obligation to be symbolic role models as old people, not as old people, but as distinguished people who are not just young, rabid.
Of an earlier generation.
Of an earlier generation. Yeah. So ring, why not?
And this came up when I recorded with Sandy McClatchy, who you connected me with a few years ago.
And he's married. Yeah,
and he admitted how absolutely bizarre it was to be on the front page of the New York Times Sunday style section as a husband and husband. That I asked back in 1978 when you were fired from Princeton for teaching gay literature, did you imagine in 2013, I think, when they got hitched, maybe a few years earlier. He said
it was Yale, not Princeton.
Yale,
and he wasn't fired. He simply was not renewed, which is you make it sound more dramatic than it is. I know, assistant professors, by and large, are there and then they leave.
Right.
So
he had the
he was the first person to do a gay lit course in the 70s at Yale, which was a brave thing to have done.
He went to Princeton from there.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And then he came back to Yale. So
everything worked out. But that sense of I asked in 1978. 1978 could you have imagined that future?
Not.
He said, I couldn't have imagined it in 2008. And that the sudden leap was just mind-blowing to him.
That's right.
This is where things went. Do you feel that role model thing that you mentioned?
When young people tell me that, then of course I do. But this is part of a larger question. When did I become old? Young people say, oh, you are a role model, or you are somebody I look up to. Me? When? How? Why? And then you realize, on the one hand, I used to think that my students got younger every year because I was telling them the same things, but they got younger and younger. On the other hand, I don't think that's the way it was. No, they weren't getting younger.
Yeah, do you remember the first time you met, I don't know if you ever had, students who were the children of previous generation students?
I remember very well. The first one was the son of this man who was my editor, a very smart boy. And I had him in my office, and whenever I had a really smart student who was a good writer, immediately I said, come, I want to talk to you. And I always asked the same question, how did you get to be a good writer? The answers were always universally the same. Two things. One, I was an avid reader from an early age. Two, in junior high school, Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so was beating my hands to make me better. I really think that writing is a habit which is like language acquisition. If you don't have it down at a certain point, you can certainly learn to improve, but it's best taught and best learned at a younger age. Mm-hmm. So I've had students at 17, 18, 19. They write like angels, and they all give me exactly the right answer. This boy came in. I said, well, tell me, where were you educated? And he named a suburban Dallas high school. I said, oh, is that good? He said, yes. But before that, that was only my last 2 or 3 years. Before that, I was in Massachusetts. I said, whereabouts? And he said, Worcester, Massachusetts. And I said, oh. And I said, was your education there good? He said, it was wonderful. And I said, did you come down here because of a family job? Somebody transferred? He said, yes, my father worked up there and came down here. I said, what did your father do? The name is Martin. So it's an ordinary common name. Was your father a businessman or an oil? He said, no, he's a librarian.
Yeah, hit you.
And I said, oh, wait, you're Rusty's son. He said, yes, I didn't want to tell you that. I said, if this window was not barred shut, I would jump out of it right now. But I have had 3 or 4 children whose parents were my students in the 70s.
Yeah. And was that disorienting? Because how could they possibly have had, unless they were having children at the age of 12? You couldn't imagine they were...
Well, how could they be having children when I was still 30? I don't know. Actually, I was 30 when I was their teacher. I was 30. I started teaching full-time at 26. Mm-hmm. So the decade of the 70s, I was in my 20s, turning from mid-20s to mid-30s. So all of that is fine.
Yeah. That's what I'd wondered. And again, it only occurred to me during the drive-in, that sense of, again, we'll say legacy in terms of, what you feel you've accomplished is the wrong word.
It is certainly true.
The impact you've had.
Well, no. Another thing is true. You write a book and you say, oh, a book is forever. Fine. That's sort of true. It's permanent. It's a tangible, physical, visible object. But most human endeavors, all literature, all human creativity, or 99%, is doomed to the dust heap of history. So let's say a book, a scholarly book, a creative book, has a shelf life of 5 years or 10 years, or an argument, and then it's gone. Students will remember, not all of them, not all the time, but students will remember there are some teachers until they die. That's 50, 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. So that legacy is much stronger. On the one hand, it's more ephemeral, it's seeming to be more ephemeral. On the other hand, it's longer in terms of the actual number of years that the effect remains.
The last question from the last time we spoke. Did you ever get a dog?
No, I'm becoming less. I'm becoming less convinced that a dog is in my future, if only for two reasons. One, I go back and forth between here and Connecticut, and schlepping a small dog, on the train back and forth is something of a hardship. And two, as a friend of mine in Dallas reminded me, who lives in a ranch house, he said, just remember, at 3 a.m, this couple has a pair of ancient miniature poodles. At 3 a.m, I can pad out and open the door to the backyard and let the dogs out, and they'll come back. If you're living on the 29th floor of a Manhattan apartment building, and it's February, and it's cold, and it's icy, and Rover doesn't like the salt or the sand or the snow, and Rover doesn't like wearing booties, you've got a real problem. I thought, maybe I'll just pat the dogs of my neighbors.
I told you last time, just take a job as a dog walker, so you get the vicarious.
This has been suggested. No, that's right.
Real last question. What would you ask me? This is the third time we've spoken, and it's usually me asking all the questions.
Have you, in the 6 years
that
you've been doing this, have you gotten a sense not only of gratification for yourself, but also a sense of performing a kind of public service that is helping or teaching or enlightening other people?
Yeah, to both. This gives meaning to my life, first and foremost, especially because of how I live out in the suburbs, out a little bit beyond the suburbs. There's not a lot of people to sit down and talk to. So the idea of having this every week gives me something. As far as people's responses to it and you know what it brings them, first, right after the election in 2016, I posted the very end of Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, the line about how you have two choices when you're in the inferno: either accept it or find the things that are not inferno and give them space and help them to grow, which I think is, without being grandiose, what I'm doing here, trying to just capture something about culture and art. On a specific level, the cartoonist interviews are the ones that other artists and cartoonists get something. Like they'll come back with, I never thought about, not the practice and the mechanical aspects of making art and telling stories, but they pick something up from hearing other cartoonists talk about how they developed and, you know, some of their approaches to what they do and how they became who they became. With other writers and artists, you know, the non-cartooning set, there are people who, oh my God, that Harold Bloom thing just, you know, blew my mind. So there's a celebrity aspect to some of this stuff, but you know, I think in general, yeah, people who listen actually get something.
If I may just add one last thing, we talk about curiosity and we talk about learning. One of the things that I'm proud of is that as a teacher, I continue to learn from other teachers. Now, I'm not talking about English teachers or humanities teachers or university professors, but I've been aware, and these are all things of the body. I was aware when I used to take swimming lessons from a coach, or when I used to do ballroom dancing classes, neither of which I do anymore, but I swim and I can dance. But now that I take yoga classes, I am deeply alert to how a teacher works. And this is teaching subjects or skills or things that I have no natural gift for. And I can go to a yoga class, and a triangle pose is a triangle pose. But when you hear somebody putting you through your paces, it all has to do with the tone of voice, the pacing, the instruction, the timbre of the voice, the metaphors that are used. And I say to myself, I like his teaching, I like hers, I don't like his. I can still do the pose, but I don't like the way I'm being taught.
Right.
And that must be something analogous to what you're saying about the cartoonist. I'm not going to learn anything from a literary person about how to write, and I'm not going to learn anything from another academic teacher, where I still at the university, about how to teach. I might learn a little trick or a little technique or something. But but listening to people talk to me about my body, move a millimeter this way.
It's what you talk about throughout the book. It's the act of seeing. They're telling me how they see something.
That's
how
right.
they see life.
That's right.
And they're conveying
how they
that.
See me.
Yeah, but again, it's still you're an external thing to them, and that they know how to see something in a way that you
That's
don't.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
I remember years ago when I was doing ballroom dancing classes, my teacher, who was really strict, was being very gentle with me. And I said, look, my ego is not on the line. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people, mostly women, will go and they're very fragile and they have to be coaxed into this. I said, look, I'm paying you money. Yeah. If I'm doing something badly, tell me. She said, oh, okay.
Great. Yeah.
That was great. So from then on, it was, if you do that again, I'm going to bite your shoulder. Or if you do that again, I'm going to slap you. I said, good, thank you. So that was, I like tough mentors.
Yeah. I was very happy. I recorded with Nicholas Del Banco a few months ago, and I never really had a writing class in my life. And we discussed my crappy writing, and I sent him the 2 short stories I'd written in 13 and 14, partly because as I prepared for that show and researched more of his life, I felt much more of I should have been writing all this time, and there's severe anxiety issues around why I don't do that. But I've started going back to it. But the way he tore apart my 2 pieces was fantastic, because it was someone, instead of my writer pals who were just like, hey, that's great, Gil, keep working on this and this. He carefully eviscerated me, which is great.
My longtime partner is my severest and therefore my best critic. Mm-hmm. And if I give him something, which I dread doing every time, I hold my breath until it comes back. And as he says to me, and I am willing to exceed, though I hate saying this, almost everything he says is right. Almost everything he says improves what I write. And this is what students have said to me, too. But of course, with students, it's triage. You can't do this with every student because they don't care as much. But if you have somebody who you know cares, has a gift, and is profiting from what you say, then you lay into them. I will treat you like an adult. Fine.
I will send you some of my crappy stories.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I cannot read fiction. I mean, I don't know.
That's true.
I don't know how to critique.
I forgot. But yeah, I'll instead send you this little zine of poetry and ruminations that I'm working on, because that'll just bore you silly, and you'll finally have a, my God, why do I spend time talking to this guy? Realization. I've long felt that, the more I talk to any of you guys, the more shallow you'll realize I truly am. So I may as well call it a day now.
Well, thank you very much. Into the depths. Thank you, Gil.
And that was Willard Spiegelman. He doesn't have a website or a social media presence, which is for the best, but he's written some really good books. The ones I've read are 7 Pleasures, Essays on Ordinary Happiness, and Senior Moments, Looking Back, Looking Ahead, as well as this new one, If You See Something, Say Something. Now, the first 2 are available in better bookstores and online. The last one, as we mentioned, only has limited distribution. But if you go to smu.edu and search for Willard Spiegelman, you'll be able to find the book that way. There's also going to be a link to it in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to give it a look and buy it. Willard continues to write for the Wall Street Journal, so you can search their site for his pieces. He's got a couple of really good ones that have come out just in the past 2 or 3 months. And he also published a really wonderful piece on the poet Adrienne Rich, which is spelled Adrienne with E-N-N-E. Anyway, it was in the Yale Review last year, and he alluded to it in the 2016 episode that we recorded. You can find that at poems.com by searching for Willard Spiegelman and Adrienne Rich. I really enjoyed that, and as you guys probably know, I'm a poetry moron, so he really is able to convey what is amazing about her poetry, and also what things are kind of clunky and repetitive when you look at somebody's collected works over 60 years. Anyway, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Willard, so, who you reading? If you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one just went up a little while ago, and it features new material from Shannon Wheeler, Barry Blitt, Martin Rosen, Nicholas Delbanco, Eshkol Nevo, Paul Gravett, Eddie Portnoy, Vanda Kreft, and Cullen Murphy. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, the secret project that I mentioned at the very end of the conversation with Willard, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, we recorded this episode at Willard's apartment in New York City. I drove in, so there was the $10 at the GW, another $32 for parking, and then a few bucks for coffee. Rather than take the subway, I decided to walk the mile and a half down there and back, as well as over to my friend's place, so I saved $6 that way. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or if you just want to toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janizik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with science fiction author Levi Tadar or political science professor Adolph Reed Jr. You'll have to come back to find out who you get. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. That'll help us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.